tonight on Reporting Scotland. 20 years after the country voted for devolution, the First Minister warns the principle is now under threat from Brexit. We speak to Tony Blair, the Prime Minister at the time. He tells us he wanted to bind the two countries together by merging Scottish and English football. Also in the programme, calls to reopen the Forth Road Bridge to tackle the queues on the Queensferry crossing. Anticipation at Celtic Park as the world's most expensive footballer arrives for tomorrow night's Champions League game. And as a book on Peter Manuel wins a prestigious award, we look at the enduring fascination for one of Scotland's worst serial killers. Good evening. The First Minister has called for a cross-party effort to defend devolution. In a speech to mark the 20th anniversary of the referendum that established the Scottish Parliament, Nicola Sturgeon said Brexit posed a threat to Holyrood's powers. But the Conservatives have described that as scaremongering. Here's our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
20 years after Scotland voted for its devolved Parliament, the fifth First Minister argues that Brexit legislation at Westminster threatens to undermine Holyrood's powers.
Westminster will decide what areas of already devolved policy will actually remain devolved in the future. So on the very day that we should be celebrating devolution, we're also being called upon to defend it.
To defend or not let wither the principle that everything is devolved to Holyrood unless it is explicitly reserved to Westminster. On that basis, Nicola Sturgeon thinks this place should take full control over agriculture and fisheries when the UK completes Brexit. But under the current EU withdrawal bill going to the vote in the Commons tonight, she thinks Westminster will grab those powers for itself. Her critics say that's scaremongering.
We know that powers are going to be repatriated from Brussels. They're going to come first at UK level and then be further devolved to the devolved administrations. But it has to happen in that order. And I think the political point scoring Nicola was trying to do today is a little bit cheeky, given that it's her party that in the long term wants to hand those same powers directly back to Brussels again.
So just as in the 1997 referendum, when political rivals campaigned together, the First Minister is calling for a new multi-party consensus to defend and enhance devolved powers. But is that realistic when a second independence referendum remains the First Minister's goal?
That's the challenge for all of us. That's a challenge for me as somebody who believes in independence to say, well, OK, short of independence, where do I think we could make further progress? And it's a challenge for those who oppose independence to be prepared to talk to me about where we might find some agreement. But occasionally, and actually more than occasionally, we should all be prepared to put our party interests aside and act in the national interest.
Specifically, she wants Holyrood to have new powers in key areas, including immigration, EU relations and social security, which is already partly devolved.
Let's work for whatever powers we need, but let's use the powers that we've got to address the big issues facing communities up and down Scotland at the present time.
We've still got more capacity for self-government than has yet been realised in Scotland, and that's as much to do with the boldness and the political will with which the existing powers are used as it is to do with arguing for new powers.
We're not interested, though, in another constitutional argument between Scotland and England. That seems to be what Nicola Sturgeon's interested in, and we are not.
Satisfactory, I think.
2 decades after the vote for devolution, how power is shared across the UK is far from settled. Glenn Campbell, Reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Well, as we saw there, Tony Blair was the Prime Minister on whose watch devolution was achieved, although he later admitted he was never, as he put it, a passionate believer. In a wide-ranging interview to mark the anniversary, Mr Blair has revealed that after the devolution vote, he was keen to maintain national bonds. As he told our political editor Brian Taylor, football became an unlikely priority.
Should Rangers and Celtic switch to the much wealthier English Premier League? The plan is regularly floated and so far consistently blocked. But Tony Blair told me he wanted to go further. He wanted to merge the English and Scottish leagues entirely, to cement the two nations together after the divergence of devolution.
I think in retrospect I would have looked for more ways of trying to keep Scotland and England culturally aligned. You know, I mean, I know it sounds a bit strange, but I was for a time quite obsessed with the idea that, for example, for football, we should be opening up, you know, the English League and the Scottish League and having them together, because I always thought, you know, we should be looking at ways of making sure that people felt a connection.
A single British football team, perhaps, as well?
No, I never wanted to go. That was going to be a step far too far.
The idea remained just a prime ministerial obsession and came to nothing 20 years ago and since. But Mr. Blair told me he still backed it and the search for other ties that bind Scotland and England. Despite those qualms, Tony Blair insists the devolution referendum 2 decades ago was the right policy, generating the right outcome. The morning after the referendum, Mr. Blair congratulates Donald Dewar on a clear yes vote.
Satisfactory, I think.
Very satisfactory and well done.
Yes,
well done indeed. Great to see you.
But there were fewer smiles when the plan was first announced a year earlier. Then it provoked protest and turmoil, talk of betrayal. But Tony Blair says the referendum was vital, that the Scottish Parliament is only in place now because that popular mandate neutralised opposition at Westminster.
I was absolutely convinced that we were never going to get devolution. I'd studied the history very carefully for over 100 years. We tried to get devolution and failed. We were never going to get it unless you blocked off the possibility of the House of Lords then coming along and effectively derailing it. And the only way you could do that is as a sort of prequel to any vote, to have the will of the people made clear. So it really wasn't a way of escaping the commitment to devolution, but a way of delivering it.
Jeremy Corbyn!
And the Labour Party? Tony Blair is no fan of Jeremy Corbyn, but regards his leadership as settled for now. However, he wants Labour to embrace modernisation in order to rise up the ranks in Scotland.
I think there was always a mythology in the UK that Scotland was a sort of Labour territory through and through and nothing would ever displace it. And I used to say, look, it's a Middle Scotland as well as a Middle England. And if you want to be in a position to articulate a distinctive and clear political programme, then I think you're best being in the situation where you've got those three dimensions to your politics: strong belief in social justice, modern way of achieving it, and strong defence of the Union.
Tony Blair's government held the referendum and set up a Scottish Parliament. But the initiative was always driven by the Scottish people. And just as they did 20 years ago, the Scottish people will choose their own future. Brian Taylor, reporting Scotland.
Exactly a week ago, the Queensferry crossing was opened by the Queen, but in recent days the bridge has been beset by long queues. It's led to a call for the Forth Road Bridge to be reopened to traffic. But tonight, as the situation looks to have improved, that was dismissed as unworkable. Stephen Godden can tell us more.
Tonight's rush hour on the Queensferry crossing. Busy but moving.
Ah, here we go, Queensferry crossing for the first time.
Since first making the journey on the opening day, Mark Lovell is now getting a better sense of his new commute.
Today was okay. It was probably, took me about 15-20 minute delay going over the bridge. So I would say that was normal compared, with the old bridge. I was actually a bit better than what I expected this morning.
But combine commuting with curiosity, and the result has been delays and frustration, felt strongly in Newton, a village close to the new bridge.
It's just a nightmare. It takes you about an hour to get to Queensferry, and then when you get there you can't get back because the traffic's jammed on the local roundabout.
It's impacting my business. If there's tailbacks, nobody's going to want to park, leave their queue and then go back in the queue, because when they go back out nobody's going to give them way, so it's impacting the business.
Since the Queensferry crossing opened, only cyclists and pedestrians have been allowed to use the old road bridge as work is carried out to turn it into a dedicated public transport route. But the long delays have led the local MSP to call for a change in strategy.
We have to keep all options on the table. We've got a perfectly good bridge, albeit in need of some repairs, that could sustain some level of transportation to relieve the pressure as a sort of release valve. So all I'm asking is that Transport Scotland don't close the bridge for major works until we're absolutely clear that all of the teething problems with the Queensferry crossing are resolved.
But, say ministers, the long-term strategy, the two bridges working in tandem, depends in the short term on the work getting the Forth Road Bridge ready being completed.
Now at that point, which is scheduled for about 6 weeks, we're trying to see if we can get it down to 4 weeks. At that point, traffic will move, some traffic will move off the Queensferry crossing, and the Queensferry crossing itself will move up to 70 miles an hour, and also the average speed cameras can come off then, so you should see a further improvement because there will be more capacity at that time.
For now, drivers are asked for their continued patience, each passing rush hour offering a fresh measure of progress. Stephen Gordon reporting Scotland at the Queensferry crossing.
What's been described as an unexploded military device has been found close to a North Sea oil platform. The object was discovered last month following a routine inspection of pipelines in the Ninian field, but its existence has only just emerged. Rebecca Curran reports.
Just 130 metres from this oil platform lies an unexploded wartime device. It was discovered near a pipeline several weeks ago during a routine underwater inspection. The Ninian Central platform is still operating with 190 people on board. The Ninian field is 380 kilometres northeast of Aberdeen. The device is believed to be an anti-submarine weapon. The BBC has seen a risk assessment by the owners of the field, Canadian company CNR. It says the device has a potential explosive load of 130 to 150 kilograms of TNT. It lies adjacent to the utilities and methanol pipelines, and specialists say it does not pose a hazard unless it's impacted, damaged or hit. It's not the first time this has happened in the North Sea. In 1997, Enterprise Oil removed a large World War II bomb from its Nelson platform. An exclusion zone has been set up around the device in the Ninian field as a precaution.
Well, Rebecca's in Aberdeen this evening. Rebecca, any indication as to how this device is going to be dealt with?
Well, CNR say that when the device was discovered 2 weeks ago, they informed all of the relevant authorities and are now working with a specialist company which has classed it as safe. Now, the UK Coast Guard say that they were told about this, but only at the end of last week. And the Health and Safety Executive has also been informed. But the news wasn't made public until this risk assessment carried out by CNR International was leaked. Now, the company say there is no risk to the workers on board the Ninian Central platform or indeed to the surrounding environment, but nevertheless specialists say that this device should be removed sooner rather than later, and the company say they are currently working on a plan to do just that.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. One of Scotland's most senior police officers has cancelled his retirement plan amid an investigation into the Chief Constable of the National Force. Deputy Chief Constable Ian Livingston was going to leave in the autumn, but he's decided to stay on for the foreseeable future. His announcement came after Police Scotland Chief Constable Phil Gormley stepped aside while he's investigated over allegations of gross misconduct. Mr Gormley denies the claims. The majority of Scotland's MPs are tonight preparing to vote against the bill that will transfer all EU laws into British law and pave the way for Brexit. Despite this, Downing Street says it's confident the vote will go the UK government's way. Well, our political correspondent David Porter is in Westminster. And David, a late night in prospect for all.
Jackie, a very, very long and late night in prospect when literally MPs and others will be burning the midnight oil. What they're discussing are plans which, in effect, will give the UK government the legal toolkit to go ahead and make Brexit a reality. They will debate the issue until midnight, then they will embark on a series of votes which could take an hour or so. Now, Labour MPs, Liberal Democrats and the SNP will all vote against the legislation. They say that it is in effect a power grab by the UK government. They are particularly concerned that what could happen is that powers could come back from Brussels to Westminster, but they are not sure that those powers in areas like fishing and agriculture may then be devolved to Holyrood. Now, the UK government says no, that will not be the case, that any powers that Holyrood has at the moment will not be returned to Westminster, and they see Holyrood as having more powers. Now, the parliamentary arithmetic of this is that it could be a very tight vote tonight. I must say that the UK government whips seem very relaxed. They think that they will get it through. The truth is that both the Conservatives and Labour are divided on the issue of Brexit. The Conservative pro-Europeans, I think, are keeping their powder dry. They will seek to change the legislation at a later date when we get into the detailed line-by-line scrutiny, when they will go for concessions. One interesting part about tonight could be how many Labour MPs defy their leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and decide not to vote against the legislation. So I think the UK government will win tonight. They will be fairly happy about that. But the prospect for the weeks and months ahead, we are going to get a lot of these lengthy and late night debates at Westminster over Brexit, and I think some of the votes could be eye-wateringly close.
David Porter at Westminster, thank you. Is definitely not going to be the pitter-patter of tiny panda feet at Edinburgh Zoo this year. Police investigating allegations of corruption made against the leader of North Lanarkshire Council have found no crime took place. The probe into Jim Logue came after the local authority received an anonymous letter highlighting issues with procurement processes and contracts. The Labour councillor said he'd been the victim of a smear and described the investigation as a waste of time. The world's most expensive footballer is in Glasgow tonight. Neymar and the rest of the PSG team are here to play Celtic tomorrow in the first game of the Champions League group stage. While staying with football, the head of the Scottish FA says there's no appetite from within its membership for a review of Scottish football's handling of the Rangers EBT issue, which you might recall is a controversial tax scheme. Stuart, Peter Manuel was handsome and charming, but now a reminder of tonight's main news. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has called for a cross-party effort to defend devolution. On the 20th anniversary of the vote, she said Brexit posed a threat to Holyrood's powers. But the Conservatives claimed that the First Minister's views were scaremongering. And that's Reporting Scotland.